This video is brought to you by Nebula. Somalia doesn't have a great international reputation. It's one of the poorest and most violent countries in the world, and it's been in a state of crisis since the collapse of Siad Barre's authoritarian regime in 1991. However, tucked away in Somalia's northwest, there's actually a functioning democratic state called Somaliland, which has been de facto independent for over 30 years and held peaceful presidential elections just last month. Despite its best efforts, Somaliland has not yet been recognised as an independent state by any UN member state. But this could all be about to change. Earlier this week, it was reported that Trump was planning to make the US the first country to recognise Somaliland. So in this video, we're going to take an abridged look at the history of Somaliland, why Trump wants to recognise it, and whether it's actually a good idea. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, to understand this story, you need a bit of context about Somaliland. We've actually done a couple of videos on Somaliland before, so go watch that if you want to know more. But the TLDR is that modern-day Somalia used to be split into two colonial territories, Italian Somaliland in the east and British Somaliland in the northwest. In 1960, British Somaliland became the independent country of Somaliland, to be recognised by 35 other UN members. 5 days later, though, Italy gave up Italian Somaliland, and the two immediately united to become the Somali Republic, which is what we now call Somalia. In retrospect, this was probably a bit of a mistake from Somaliland's perspective. Italian Somaliland has a population roughly 8 times that of British Somaliland, and the north was often overlooked by the south. Somalia's first constitution, for example, only passed in 1961 because it had overwhelming support in the south. Somaliland got its chance for autonomy in 1991, when Somali dictator Siad Barre was overthrown by anti-government rebels, including the Somali National Movement. The Somali National Movement were a northern paramilitary group, and after ousting Barre, they decided to declare Somaliland's independence, with basically the same borders as the British protectorate of Somaliland. In 2001, they held a referendum on independence, which was supported by 97% of Somaliland citizens. Since then, Somaliland has been essentially an autonomous state outside of Somalia, and a beacon of stability in a region otherwise beset by chaos. They've held multiple peaceful elections, and in 2017, Freedom House ranked Somaliland as the only free country in East Africa. The country is very poor, but they've got their own government, currency, passports, police force, license plates, and even a consulate in Washington. Despite this, Somaliland hasn't been explicitly recognised by any other country, although it's been indirectly recognised by a handful of countries. South Africa, for instance, accepts Somaliland passports. The UAE set up a small military presence in the country in 2017, and Ethiopia signed an agreement with the Somaliland government to use Berbera Port earlier this year. Interestingly, however, the question of Somaliland's prospective independence has been a relatively hot topic in both the UK and the US. In the UK, 5 local councils, namely Bristol, Sheffield, Cardiff, Liverpool and Tower Hamlets, have, for some reason, passed resolutions recognising Somaliland's right to independence, and it's a weirdly popular idea on parts of the right. Recognising Somaliland was actually one of Nigel Farage's UKIP policies back in 2015, and it's long been a pet project of Gavin Williamson, who you might remember as Theresa May's Defence Secretary. Williamson, who's perhaps best known for suggesting Russia should, quote, go away and should shut up, and that the UK should fire paintballs at Spanish ships off the coast of Gibraltar, actually got the UK to set up an office in Somaliland's capital, Hargeisa, in 2015, and introduced a bill about recognising Somaliland as a country to the Commons last year, and has even been recognised as an honorary Somaliland citizen in recognition of his efforts. In the US, the issue popped up earlier this year when House Democrat Ilhan Omar, who's perhaps best known as one of the most progressive Democrats in the Senate and a member of the so-called Squad, gave a speech attacking the port deal between Ethiopia and Somalia. In that speech, Omar, who's ethnically Somali, was quoted as saying, "For as long as I'm in Congress, no one will take over the seas belonging to the nation of Somalia, and the United States will not support others who seek to steal from us." Anyway, now the issue has popped up again after the news outlet Semaphore reported that Trump was planning to recognise Somalia's statehood once he gets into office. So why has Trump suddenly decided to do this? Well, it might be partly about annoying lefties like Ilhan Omar. It's also a rebuke to the Biden administration, who reversed a Trump order to withdraw US troops from Somalia. It also seems to be in part thanks to lobbying from Gavin Williamson, who actually said a month ago that he thought he'd convinced Trump to recognise Somaliland, although no one really paid attention when he said it. And it might also be down to lobbying from the UAE, which has emerged as a close US ally over the last few years, and has relatively close ties with the Somaliland government. But the main reason that Trump, as well as some other Republicans, are now keen on the idea is probably because Somaliland, which sits just south of the Red Sea along the Gulf of Aden and across from Yemen, is in a strategically important position. The Red Sea is an incredibly important international trade route, usually accounting for about 30% of all global container traffic. But passage has been disrupted over the past year or so by the Houthis in Yemen, who've been attacking commercial ships transiting through the region. A presence in Somaliland will give the US yet another way to push back against the Houthis and other groups in the region, hopefully guaranteeing safe passage for commercial traffic. Recognising Somaliland will also probably improve US-Ethiopia relations, given Ethiopia wants to sign a port deal with Somaliland, and this could also be strategically useful given Ethiopia's relatively central role in African and East African affairs. Nonetheless, even if there is a clear strategic rationale, and it's probably true that Somaliland does in some sense deserve independence, the reason that groups like the African Union generally oppose redrawing borders like this is that, while Africa's current borders clearly aren't perfect, the process of redrawing them usually creates even more instability. Now, you might argue that Somaliland is an exception. After all, it's been de facto independent for more than 30 years, and the risk of a domino effect are negligible. But even within Somalia, there are other secessionist movements that would be encouraged by Trump's recognition of Somaliland. Only a few months ago, for instance, Puntland, another autonomous region in Somalia, declared its independence after the Somalian government pushed through a controversial constitutional reform. We're not saying that Trump necessarily shouldn't recognise Somaliland, but it could further destabilise an already unstable region, and perhaps this sort of thing should be done in tandem with regional groups like the African Union, rather than unilaterally. As you've probably noticed, the news cycle is particularly fast right now, with coups, elections and governmental gossip happening all over the world. In fact, with Trump heading into the White House, that chaos is only likely to get worse. If you're feeling a little lost and even a little depressed, then you might want to check out our series WTF USA, where we explain everything that's happened across the pond in the land of the free. Because while the election might be over, the number of WTF moments only looks likely to increase. Unlike some of our other more serious videos, the tone of WTF USA is more light-hearted and takes something of an irreverent look at what's going on. Regular viewers will be pleased to hear that the series has been extended due to overwhelmingly popular demand over on Nebula.
If these trends continue, hey!
Now, if you didn't know, Nebula is an independent creator-owned streaming platform that specialises in thoughtful content. Over there you can find creators like Wendover Productions, Real Life Law and Legal Eagle, with many of them releasing their very own original series on the platform. We're super proud of WTF USA, and we hope that with your support we'll be able to make other interesting, weird and entertaining series with Nebula in the future. So signing up genuinely helps TLDR to grow and expand. You can also watch every normal TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in some instances before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, then click our link in the description to get 40% off. That's just $30 a year or $2.50 a month. We really hope you check out the series, and as always, thanks for your support.